Chapter 7. Morale Making. What sends thousands of men across a shell-swept battlefield or keeps them in water-soaked trenches amidst vermin and fever? What keeps members of a political party in line, factory workers at their tasks, ship's crews obedient in all sorts of weather, passengers on sinking ocean liners behaving creditably to their humanity, workmen with wives and children staying out doggedly on strike? To the external observer, there is something magical in the sight of thousands of men obeying the same order, who seem to be miraculously moved by the fiat of a single brain. The magic is not impromptu. In all important instances, morale is the product of science and art. It is made. Even savages who fight with spears and arrows do not leave morale to chance. Hence, the war dance, the tom-tom, the battle cry, the ram's horn, impromptu efforts of gifted leaders to inspire morale in emergencies. The Philistines, quit you like men, or you will become the slaves of the Hebrews as they have been yours. Or Napoleon's soldiers, 40 centuries look down upon you. Or Lawrence's, don't give up the ship, are but romantic flashes in the long grind of age-long warfare. The effective morale that wins wars is no sudden inspiration, but the result of forethought and painstaking labor. The Macedonian phalanx with which Alexander conquered the world was the creation of his father Philip. Caesar's disciplined legions were the products of a firmly established civilization. Frederick's regiments had been drilled by his father. Napoleon profited by the labors of Carnot. His old guard had been tempered in the fire of many victories. The value of morale, as compared with other engines of warfare, was never so keenly appreciated as now. General Foch declares flatly that morale alone wins battles. 90,000 conquered men retire before 90,000 conquering men only because they have had enough. They no longer believe in victory because they are demoralized at the end of their moral resistance. Defeat, he says again, is in fact a purely moral result, that of a mood of discouragement, of terror, wrought in the soul of the conquered by the combined use of moral and material factors simultaneously resorted to by the victor. This view is commonly accepted by modern generals. We see one curious result of it in the use of high explosives, not to kill, but to terrify the enemy. This was the purpose of the firing of the long-range gun trained on Paris by the Germans in their last drive. "See that battery firing in front of us?" said a Japanese general in the Russo-Japanese War. "It aims at the Russian redoubts at 3,500 meters, and it is composed of mountain guns. I am sure at this distance of not killing many Russians, but I have no doubt of the pleasure with which our infantry 2 kilometers in front of us take in hearing the shells go over their heads." The measure of morale in use by army officers is the percentage of loss a unit can sustain without going to pieces. Judged by that standard, there never were displays of higher morale than in the last war, when reports of units wiped out to a man were not rare. Soldiers lacking morale run before anyone is hurt, as at the Battle of Bull Run. De Wet in his memoirs relates how on 2 different occasions his troops ran away under the fire of artillery without having lost a single man. What is the technique of morale making? What are the methods by which this spirit that often defies death is created? Morale making is in progress in all fields where a definite behavior is desired from large numbers of men. The morale staffs of the army are duplicated by the welfare departments of industrial plants and the publicity bureaus of political parties. All have borrowed from the army, in which the methods were first developed, and have reached the highest perfection. We may divide the methods of morale making into 3 classes: the mechanical, the hypnoidal, and the rational. Mechanical are those means that rely upon habit formation. Men grow accustomed to danger. Miners and architectural ironworkers daily face risks without a thought, which make even the unaccustomed onlooker turn pale. Drills and salutes are of the mechanical sort. Army officers believe in them and believe also in making them rigorous and carried through with the punctiliousness of a religious ritual. Although it may well be doubted whether the habit of concerted action on the parade ground survives the test of battle. What drill does is to fix the status of commander and private so firmly in the minds of both that only a very great shock can destroy the prestige of the one and the habit of obedience in the other. Of a hypnoidal character are drums and bugles, flags and banners. Phrases like "La Patrie," "Remember the Maine," "Vaterland," "They shall not pass," belong to the same category. A crowd is hypnoidal, The new recruit on entering the army is subjected to an irresistible mass suggestion, which only an abnormal individual can resist. His moral judgments become identical with those of the organization of which he has become a member. This mass suggestion aims at the subjection of the personal will to the will of the superior entity, the company, the regiment, the army. Its object is uniformity. If the organization be one of great reputation and prestige, there springs up that pride, or esprit de corps, which is morale of the highest order. In the average man, the discovery of opposition between his personal conduct and the moral judgment of the regiment or army produces acute distress, known as shame. Stephen Crane's hero, in The Red Badge of Courage, amazes his comrades by his superhuman daring after he has been tempered in the hellfire of shame following upon his initial cowardice. What makes such a book as Three Soldiers by Dos Passos repulsive to most men is the absence in the three chief figures of the feeling which normal men have when discovered doing anything condemned by the great body of their fellows. Other men, too, have felt the senselessness of war, but have had their personal repugnance overcome by the unreasoning, yet somehow significant fear of being found devoid of the fighting instinct. War is hell, they said, but went through it. Leadership, too, should be placed among the hypnoidal agencies. Its appeal is to something instinctive, unreasoned, and inexpressible. Yet, although leaders are born, they are also made. Leadership operates according to definite principles and a knowledge of its technique, while often possessed by born leaders intuitively, may also be acquired by men not exceptionally endowed by nature. The influence of a leader arises in the first place from his representative character. He commands not for himself, but for that higher being, sovereign or cause which he serves. It follows that he must give the impression of impersonality. To seem free from the weaknesses of mere men, he cultivates an impassive demeanor. He encourages the legend of infallibility. The leader never reverses himself. An officer should never take a step from which he must back down. He must, nevertheless, impress his followers with his humanity, and in his human capacity, his prestige depends upon the myth of his past. Every gesture becomes a sign of latent strength, of unlimited courage. In a crisis, he must, of course, infallibly lead. In the words of the French field regulations, the officers should be permeated with the idea that their first and greatest mission consists of giving an example to their troops. Nowhere is the soldier more obedient and more devoted than in battle. His eyes are constantly fixed on his chiefs. Their bravery and coolness will pass unto his soul. They render him capable of all exertions and all sacrifice. Rational methods of morale-making operate with ideas, with language. Logic and reasoning are in the foreground here. The aim of it all is to fill every individual with a sense of devotion to something greater than himself. Armies in which the idea of a cause or common end dominates all personal interests reach the highest pitch of morale. The power of such armies was demonstrated in the Boer and Russo-Japanese wars. In the Boer War, forces numerically much inferior to their opponents for a time had the British Empire shaking. In the Russo-Japanese War, the patriotically inspired troops went through to victory. Patriotism, in these and many other instances, has proved to be worth more than countless divisions of indifferent fighters, not vitally interested in the purposes of their leaders. Vastly more potent than patriotism as an energizer of morale is religion. The Crusaders, the followers of Muhammad, Cromwell's Ironsides are examples familiar to everybody. Nothing short of extermination will stop a charging army of religious fanatics, like the adherents of the Mahdi who tried conclusions with the English in the Sudan. In more recent times, the cause for which they are urged to do battle is commonly represented to the rank and file as an idealized being in distress calling for their protection. Vaterland, liberty, la France, democracy, civilization. Perhaps the defensive and appealing posture in which the cause is pictured in these latter days is due to the fact that war itself is on the defensive. It was different in other ages when men went out to fight for the Lord of hosts, to convert the nations to Allah, to conquer the world for Alexander, or get glory for Napoleon. Every nation in the World War professed to the international public to have taken up arms in self-defense. An army having no interest in the objects of a war, although weak in attack, may, like the Russians, be very formidable on the defensive. In attack, men simply obey the orders of officers whose aims they do not understand. On the defensive, they fight for one and the same cause, perfectly comprehended by all: their own safety. If morale can be made, it can also be destroyed. Victory, says Foch, is imposing our will upon the enemy. Make him believe his cause is not worth fighting for or hopeless, and he is already defeated. You are licked when you think you are, said a famous prize fighter. The primitive method of demoralization was to confront the enemy with terrifying banners, ferocious face masks, yells, and leaps. Mr. Chester Lord, who saw the great John L. Sullivan in action, writes that, in his opinion, an important element in the champion's success was the ferocious expression his face was capable of assuming, reflecting no doubt the fighting fury behind it. The glaring eye and the huge jaw thrust forward were positively terrifying. And to this, Lord thinks, was due his most notable victory, that over Slade. Shells, with their noise and stench, are more effective than painted banners or ferocious gestures. These, however, are effectively supplemented by assaults upon the soldier's faith in the cause for which he believes himself to be fighting. You are fighting not for Vaterland, but for the ambition of a dynasty. We are not the enemies of you as a people, but of your governing dynasty, proclaimed President Wilson to the Germans in the trenches. German leaflets said to each of the Allies, "You are not fighting for what you think you are, but to pull out of the fire chestnuts for the other fellows." Fraternizing parties and the sumptuous treatment of prisoners of war had the same purpose: the softening of the enemy, the mitigation of his pugnacity. It is instructive to note the technique by which revolts from the inside are handled. What does the ship captain, the military commander, the schoolmaster do when his authority is defied? In the first place, he exhibits the calmness of one whose personal fortune is not at stake. The cause, the higher entity that he serves, controls his behavior. Secondly, he is very careful to direct his disciplinary remarks or measures at the individual or individuals in whom the mutinous spirit has become explicit. He does not make the fatal mistake of assailing the whole ship's crew, regiment, or class, remembering the profound truth in the dictum that you cannot indict a whole nation. He tries to keep disaffection split up into disparate, mutually unaware units, being careful to forestall the crystallization of sentiment around a hostile leader. As long as he can do this, he may hope to suppress the mutiny. If that becomes impossible, his case is hopeless. Political campaigns closely imitate war in all those measures that are concerned with stimulating morale among friends and breaking down the morale of opponents. Morale in a party is required to resist the seductions of opposing politicians, to listen only to the arguments of friendly leaders, and to vote as directed. Successful politicians are great masters in the science of morale. It is morale that enables organizations of the Tammany type to keep control of city and state governments, despite the clamor of numerous but poorly disciplined enemies. The use of hypnoidal measures for the making of political morale is familiar to everybody. Fife and drum corps, banners, fireworks, processions, posters, buttons, pictures of leaders. In politics, the super being which all serve is the party. Loyalty to party here does the work of patriotism and religion elsewhere. The discussion of principles must be wholly neglected, for the intelligent voter does not relish being discomfited by the superior logic of an opponent in debate, but the warmth of comradeship, the magnetism of leaders, the primitive appeal of symbols, the premonitory taste of victory, exert on the great majority a far greater pull than logic, however perfect. The need of morale in peace may not be so obvious as in war, yet the disasters that follow upon a complete breakdown of morale in industry may be far greater than those that follow upon demoralization in war. Russia, the world's laboratory of social experimentation, has taught this lesson. The workers, in Emma Goldman's words, came to the factories to rest or to make something for the children at home. The farmers saw no sense in planting more than they were likely to require for their own use, if their surplus was to be confiscated by communist raiders from the cities. The result was economic collapse. Poor morale in industry shows in two ways. Workmen stay on the job but work listlessly, indulging in a great deal of absenteeism, corresponding to military AWOL, or low morale manifests itself in frequent change of job with a loss in productivity which is inseparable from much hiring and firing. Obviously, many of the measures found effective for stimulating morale in the Army are futile in industry. Flags and drums, for example. Experiments to provide workers with phonograph music have been made, but not largely followed. Esprit de corps, pride of organization, is operative in some industries of high reputation and long-standing. It is, for instance, a matter of some pride to be a locomotive engineer on the Pennsylvania Railroad or a salesman for the International Harvester Company in a foreign country. Only to a moderate extent is it possible to get results by direct appeal. Elbert Hubbard's A Message to Garcia, still extant, is remarkable as a rare type of composition. Set speeches intended to show the identity of the workers' interests with those of industry as a whole have slight success. But the many short phrases, the cliches that create the moral atmosphere in which an industrial population lives, are of great importance. Service, efficiency, loyalty, production, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. Whatever destroys the prestige of these concepts is rightly regarded by leaders of the industrial system as destructive of the system itself. It is difficult to convince the workman of the superior importance of the business or industry in which he is employed over his own happiness. The matter resolves itself in his mind simply into a choice between his own comfort and profits for the owners or stockholders. Hygienic workrooms, lunchrooms, and recreation rooms have their influence, but in the main, the efficiency, that is, the morale of labor, is commensurate with the rate of wages. Just as there is no such stimulator of morale in war as victory, a victorious army is a disciplined one, so in peaceful industry, nothing stirs ambition like the well-earned reward duly paid. Poorly paid labor is low in morale, slave labor lowest, but overpaid labor receiving a return out of proportion to the social value of the product is not the highest. Leadership plays an obscure but real part in industrial morale. When a man who is a good craftsman, but without ability as a leader, is promoted to be foreman, the result is friction, a decline in the morale of the workers, and loss in production. The petty tyranny of a tactless foreman is repaid with a minimum of production necessary to hold the job until another is found. Factory experts estimate that a very large proportion of labor turnover, say about 75%, is due to faulty labor management. In certain industries, a large labor turnover is natural. In those that are by nature seasonal, fruit picking, lumbering, harvesting, ice cutting. In these, the efficiency of labor is low not only because of the seasonal hiring and firing, but because of the poor morale of the floaters, without home ties or sense of social responsibility, who find temporary employment in them. When labor goes on strike, we have war conditions set up again. It is a struggle for morale. Men on strike require to see their comrades en masse, hence parades and demonstrations. In the Great Steel Strike of 1919, the company managers put forth much effort to prevent parades and open-air meetings. Legal permits were required to use the streets and parks as places of assembly. The managers, through their political connections, were able to block the attempts of the strikers to obtain such permits. Speech-making is indispensable for keeping the morale of strikers up to striking pitch, and halls are necessary for oratory. The company managers secured the cancellation of strikers' leases on halls. Strikebreakers are hired not for the purpose of permanently filling the places of strikers, but to break their morale. Picketing is the strikers' counteroffensive. Occasionally, it is an attack upon the morale of strikebreakers. Leaders are as important in a labor strike as in the army. Without leaders, a strike dribbles away, and the recognition of this fact is seen in the fame of unusually successful leaders like Tom Mann, Debs, Smiley. The corporation managers aim to drive a wedge between men and leaders. The leaders are labeled outsiders, professional agitators, radicals. The most telling talk in the steel strike was that Foster, the leader of the strikers, was not a pure trade unionist, but a Bolshevik. War is proclaimed not upon the enemy population, but upon their government. Great industrial strikes are conducted by armies of allies, by workmen of many grades and classes. On a railroad, there are engineers, conductors, switchmen, shopmen, maintenance of waymen, a hierarchy of various grades of skill, intelligence, responsibility, and compensation. In the steel industry, there is not only a hierarchy, like that on the railroads, but also diversity of race and nationality. Hungarians, Poles, Finns, Slovaks, Americans. Under these circumstances, the policy of the corporation manager is the old one: divide et impera. The opportunities for dividing allies who speak half a dozen different languages are numerous. The task of the labor organizer of uniting such heterogeneous elements is correspondingly difficult. Strike leaders find it practically impossible to reach the neutrals. For neutrals in an industrial war read none but capitalistic papers. To balance this handicap in the means of communication and expression, strike leaders have in their armory an idea of tremendous power. It is the idea of a class war waged for the realization of the millennium. This conception is popularly known in Europe as the general strike. Georges Sorel conceived the general strike solely as a means of morale-making. He granted that a general strike is not feasible. Nevertheless, the conception is invaluable in his opinion as a vital myth for practical purposes. Even if the only result of the general strike was to make the socialist conception more heroic, he wrote, it should on that account alone be looked upon as having an incalculable value. This idea of the general strike serves not only to raise the morale of the proletariat, but strikes terror into the hearts of stock and bondholders. That party will possess the future which can most skillfully manipulate the specter of revolution. The Radical Party is beginning to understand this. Obviously, it would be disastrous to the utility of the general strike as an instrument of morale if it were ever called into action and failed. For morale purposes, therefore, it must, as long as possible, be held in reserve. Only so long as it forbears becoming an actuality can it continue to function as a vital myth. Morale is the disposition on the part of the individuals of an organization to lose themselves for the sake of the whole or for the cause in which the whole is engaged. It is the spirit of playing the game. It is the measure of a community's civilization. Civilization would be impossible without it. A Russian author has pointed out that the behavior of a New York subway crowd would be inconceivable in Russia. Catastrophe would be the inevitable result there of such congestion as New Yorkers are used to, whereas here, good humor, individual intelligence, orderliness, morale in short, make an impossible situation almost tolerable. Morale is not instinctive. The behavior of high-spirited passengers on a sinking ocean liner is the fine fruit of a multitude of scarcely noticed, endlessly continuing socializing endeavors on the part of the race. It is for this and similar emergencies that mankind treasures up examples of unusual heroism, constructs legends about heroic personalities, perpetuates its heroes in song and story. Religion looks to the same end. By making men moral, it also raises their morale, prepares them for community of effort in daily life, and in the contingencies that try men's souls. It goes deeper. By inspiring hope and consolation, it sustains the will to live. For man cannot live by instinct alone. Life must be made acceptable to his understanding, or he faints by the way. The rationalization of life is the function of religion, and as the need of this ministration is nearly universal, religion may well be called the most important of all morale-making agencies.